All right, so we can resume. It was a very short break. Later on, we'll have a longer break. We have new dialogues between Shahrzad Hushmand and Linda Poacher, and they're going to talk about the female gaze in pedagogy and in the method. Professor Hushmand, she dedicated 7 years of traditional Quranic studies in the holy city of Qom, the most important center of Islamic studies in the world. She has a master's degree in Islamic theology at the University of Tehran and in Christian theology at the Pontifical Lateran University in Rome, former professor of Islamic studies at the Pontifical Gregorian University and the Marianum, and professor of Persian language and literature at La Sapienza University in Rome, honorary co-president of the Association Religions for Peace and the Association Karol Wojtyla, member of the Council of Experts at the Ministry of Interior for Relations with Italian Islam, vice president of the Female Council at the Pontifical Council for Culture, and member of the management committee of the magazine Donne Chiesa Mondo, which is the monthly magazine of the Italian newspaper Osservatore Romano, and she's a mother of 3. Linda Poacher, she's the daughter of Mary Help of Christian since 2003. In 2007, she graduated in philosophy at the University of Trieste. In 2011, she obtained her baccalaureate in theology in Udine. In 2014, she obtained a degree in dogmatic theology at the Pontifical Gregorian University, where she completed her doctorate in 2020. In the meantime, she's been working youth ministry, formation to consecrated life and family ministry, collaborating with different stakeholders in Italy. She is currently teaching fundamental theology, Christology, Mariology at the Pontifical Faculty of Educational Sciences Auxilium in Rome. I'll give the floor now to Professor Hushmand. Thank you. All right. Well, good evening, everybody, and thank you very much to the organizers of this meeting that is trying to lead us towards a larger mutual understanding, which is the leading way in order to bring about peace and more human relations. In the next minutes, I'd like to dwell upon 4 words that are opening this meeting. The most important key word is educating and exercising the space of knowledge. So I basically drew inspiration from the very titles of this meeting. The second expression is founding cross-disciplinarity and cross-culturality in Cristi by Guardini. And the third expression is the recreating gaze, which is specific and is the main topic of today's meeting. And last but not least, the female gaze in pedagogy, which is the more specific topic I'll be talking about. So 4 key words of this conference that we're going to examine together. The first one, educating and exercising the space of knowledge. What is the space of knowledge? Great Persian poet, Sadi of the 13th century, says that each leaf of each book is an open book to knowledge. So each leaf of each tree. So the whole universe is word book writing. Everywhere the space of knowledge can be found. The Quran says, if the sea were ink for writing the words of the Lord, the sea would be exhausted before the words of the Lord were exhausted, even if we brought a new sea to help us. The second expression, found in transdisciplinarity and transculturality. Well, taking into account these rationale, founding cross-disciplinarity and cross-culturality is nothing other than recognizing this infinite space. It means creating no limits to the journey of knowledge and not giving in to any wall, or not surrendering to border, diversity, or distances. Each and every being is a word to be known. Every culture and every religion has within it a seed of the word, as Christianity explains, and it's the word of God, as the Quran says. The Council Fathers, inspired by the Holy Spirit, wrote almost 60 years ago this: the Catholic Church rejects nothing that is true and holy in these religions. So we're using here two words of paramount importance: what is true and holy. So in other religions, we have truth and holiness too. Then the third expression, searching gaze. This is the fundamental point. The profound research is with the profound search is with the eyes. There is a sea of distance between what we feel and what we see. The certainty of the heart does not come through what we feel, but through what we see, what we encounter. Life is the time of encounter, writes Pope Francis. But to be able to perceive it, we need to search. We need to feel in need of the other. We need to feel part of the other. We need to feel as if we're waiting. The Quran says, you are the poor of God, and He is the fullness. The fourth expression, the feminine gaze. Well, the feminine look, feminine gaze, this is the gaze in search of an encounter, in search of creation, of welcoming, of an embrace. It's a gaze that is capable of penetrating reality and going beyond, even with forgiveness. Forgiveness, which is an almost divine power. The female gaze is capable of welcoming the word. It's capable of believing, in spite of everything, in the waiting behind the tomb. And it can turn into the narrating voice of the resurrection. In Christianity, a woman welcomes the word, which is incarnation, and a woman welcomes and announces the mystery of the resurrection when all the men and disciples had already left. Only Mary Magdalene was there with her feminine gaze, waiting for the master, the rabbis. So we have a Mary that is lovingly offering her womb and soul to welcome, and another Mary that is awaiting the vision of the risen one. The Quran presents Mary, mother of Jesus, as a supreme example of wisdom and knowledge. In verse 12 of chapter 66, she's being presented as the mother of universal wisdom and knowledge. So Mary is the master of wisdom. She's the source of the ultimate knowledge that is leading us to unity. So the Quran says, behold Mary, she who has preserved her virginity. This is another point in common between Christianity and Islam. She who has confirmed the truthfulness of the words of the Lord, and she's accepting the word. She is the one who has confirmed, once again, the truthfulness of the words of her Lord and the truthfulness of these books. So we've just seen that the words of the Lord are infinite. So if the sea were ink, we said before. So how is it that Mary is able to know and confirm all the words of the Lord? She is the mother of wisdom. She is the source of knowledge. And here we can also see the truthfulness of his book. And in her, so a plural is being used, and the plurality of books is turning into harmony and plurality. That's the reason why she's a model to follow, a true pedagogist. And as to the female gaze, I would like to present an example of a female teacher, a pedagogue, a beacon of courage and strength in by using another example, another woman that is loved by Christianity, Hebraism, and Islam. And she's also an important figure for the Islamic calendar. And her name is not Jira, but Ajar, the pilgrim, the one who's traveling. Agar, well, I'm going to introduce this as the topic, feminine gaze, but in today's meeting, it's important to think about this because it will lead us to um, unified vision. Agar, she was considered as a lesser important person also in her the social life. And in spite of these, she's an example to imitate and follow. She had no choice. She had to leave, to emigrate, move away. It was even the prophet of the time who ordered her to move away from everyone and from the town together with her child. Life sometimes leads us to perform irrational acts, such as Abraham's, one would say. Imported his woman to leave the inhabited places and abandon her in a barren land without a living soul, plus Ishmael, his beloved son, and the prophet himself. So, where is this pain, this suffering leading us? Towards whom or what and why? Agar will not even be able to shout because there's no one to hear her. The land is uninhabited all around. So she should let herself down, you might say. Why not? What meaning can possibly have? So this is a question we're asking ourselves. So in a world that is currently burning in the pain of humankind, this profound absurdity carried out even by the end and the will of a good man of his time. Instead, here he's the woman. Here is the female gaze. She's a sign and an example of fertility, life, acceptance, nourishment, love, courage, faith, and hope. Hagar does not let herself to be overcome by the absurdity of life. She cannot cry out, but she can walk, run, search, and resist. In the rite of Islamic pilgrimage, hold pilgrims to Mecca, women and men, in order to perform their religious act correctly and completely, must imitate Agar as she runs between the two hills of Safa and Marwa, exactly as she did back then. In the pilgrimage to Mecca, it is Hagar who appears as the guide. She's the authentic model of a true believer, an example for men and women of all times and places. Her very name means pilgrim, the one who's traveling and the one who's leading us towards a unified vision. The presence of the feminine force, one that offers life itself through the welcoming space of her womb, once, and then the vital space of her soul and her perseverance in believing and hoping. Hagar, as a woman, doesn't give up. She lives in life. She hopes in the resurrection from a situation of death and abandonment. She was forced to travel. But then, with her great will, she made the pilgrimage of the Muslims a free path to faith and hope. A pilgrimage in order to find, in order to rediscover, to know, meditate, discover, and perhaps to touch the meaning of the mystery of pain. The rite of pilgrimage in Islam would like to indicate the main road of life, to walk and not stop it. When I met Pope Francis in a very intimate encounter, he told us something. Do one thing. Walk, always walk and never stop. And she's an example of this. So she has a sublime goal in her path. And once we reach the Mecca, we meet God in our brothers and we reach a vision of unity. And this is how the great mystic poet Rumi, the contemporary of Saint Francis of Assisi, infers the meaning of the pilgrimage through verses. There are many ways of searching, but the search is always the same. Perhaps you do not see that the roads that lead to Mecca are different. One coming from Byzantium, another from Syria, and others that pass by land or sea. Consequently, the distance to be traveled is different each time, but when they reach the end, disputes, arguments, and differences of view disappear because hearts are united. This impulse of the heart, Rumi writes, is neither faith nor disbelief, but love. Rumi fi ma fi. Today, the Muslims of the world from the four corners of the earth reach Mecca in the month of pilgrimage to perform a religious act. They all dress alike, women, men, young, old, rich, poor, rulers, and subjects, in a white cotton robe, and they walk 7 times around the Kaaba, the house of God. They go around a simple cube 15 meters high with nothingness inside, the void, nothing. And they're repeating, Allahumma labbaik, Lord, here I am. This image seen from above creates a white waving motion with the constant sound of the here I am, a real sea of women and men who in reality have the light in front of them. So they have other people behind them and beside them as the Kaaba is empty. In this way, the I am reaches the ears of others as a movement of harmonious unity despite differences in color, languages, traditions, and origins. For 14 centuries, the Islamic pilgrimage has been trying to teach its faithful to imitate the steps of a woman, Hagar, who's running between the 2 hills of Safa and Marwa, and not to give up on the challenges of life, so that we never give up hope and with all that we can do, be it only running between 2 hills, with a strong faith in spite of everything. And then what is interesting is that those who see the image of the Kaaba see that this cube, the Kaaba, is also there as a semicircular shape next to it. And it's interesting because here we see the female figure that is part of the house of God. Because this part, this semicircle, looks like the part of the body that gave rise to Ishmael. And so this feminine element is part of the house of God, where all Muslims go to pray. But then I would like to mention another part of Rumi. He's also describing this journey once again. And this is the message I'd like to describe with the description of Hagar that is leading us to a pilgrimage, to a journey where you find yourself in the other when you say, here I am, the Lord, with this symbol of the house is not there, but what you find is next to it. So a man, a woman, young, old, rich or poor. And Ruby says, oh, people gone on pilgrimage, where are you? Where are you? Beloved is here. Come back, come back. The beloved is your neighbor. you live? Well, next to all, what idea did you have of wandering the Arabian desert on close inspection? The formless shape of the beloved, the master of the house, and the Kaaba are you. Try once to climb onto the roof from these house. This is Rumi mystical poems. So, and this is a sentence from the preface of a unique document conceived, designed, and drafted and written by two greatest leaders of the Catholic and Islamic words. And I'm talking about the document on human brotherhood of the 4th of February 2019. That is our Carta Magna of this meeting to work cross-culturality, cross-disciplinarity, real counter turn into reality, turns into a writing, turns into a real knowledge. And in the preface of that document, these two leaders sum up the meaning of faith. They sum up the meaning of each pilgrimage, each journey. It's true that Islam doesn't talk about Trinity, but as Professor Caltagirone also said, when he was referring to simplicity, that is no confusion, Islamic philosophers talk about unity and plurality, not only according to the Christian theology, but philosophy talks about pluralities and unities. So the message they wrote in the preface, and I think that would already be enough. It would be enough that we put up this on the wall of each school or religious institute, and that sum up the real meaning of the faith is this one. So I'm starting the quote. Faith leads the believer to see in the other a brother to be supported and loved. From faith in God who created the universe, creatures, and all human beings equal through his mercy, the believer is called to express this human brotherhood, safeguarding creation and the whole universe, and supporting every person, especially the neediest and the poorest. I'm concluding, so I made reference to Trinity. It's true that in this encounter between Christianity and Islam, the Trinitarian mystery is always a problem, but it's also interesting that these triune phrasing is presented at the beginning of each chapter of the Quran. So even though it's not the actual interpretation, the theological interpretation of Christianity, these threefold phrases opens each chapter of the Quran. And it also indicates the idea of God that is a relation. And if in Christianity, the essence of God is relation, and our conference is based on this main concept, relation. With no relation, the Christian God has no shape. Name, we can find it back a different way in the Quran with this beginning, with this phrase at the beginning of each chapter. Thank you very much for your speech, which is providing us with a lot of food or thought. And I'll give the floor to the next speaker, Linda Poker. Thank you. Yes, my response to the reflection proposed by Shahrazad is divided into two parts. First, I would simply like to share with you some resonances that these words have aroused in me, especially about the figure of Hagar. And the second part of my response, I'd like to answer a question. So how can the experience of Hagar and the experience of Islam suggests some lines of method for cross-disciplinary research following the footsteps of Hagar, and this is the main topic of has been the main topic of the last few days. Some resonances. It seems to me that the story of Hagar speaks to us first and foremost about the motherhood of God. To become a mother, Carla Canulo, in her beautiful book Essere Madre, says, well, she says, to become a mother is learning to follow another as one follows a train, to accompany him or her, to discover and gradually fulfill his or her mission in the world. God in the desert follows Hagar, first of all, with his gaze. God hears his son's cry, her son's cry, because he's following her, he's attentive and is waiting. God follows Hagar with patience and trepidation to help her to discover between the folds of her story, which is sometimes happy and sometimes painful, what her mission is. And her mission is to be the mother of a people. The story of Hagar also speaks to us about God's sovereign freedom in his actions, in particular, the fact that God gives fertility to whomever he wishes. Not only the son of the bride, but also the son of the slave girl will have offspring. Not only the child of God's promise to Abraham, but also the child of Sarah's manipulation, who, patient and unbelieving, offered her husband Agar's womb, only to regret it later, devoured by jealousy. So if we look at Hagar's departure from this point of view, then we realize that it is not God who suggests this to the prophet. Rather, God is giving in to Sarah's desire and urges Abraham to do the same. Why? Why is he doing so? Why is God doing so? Perhaps because the Creator knows the hearts of these women, and he knows that Agar's stay in the camp would make life impossible for both of them. It's not enough to be a woman, not even to be a mother, in order to be, so to speak, good people. The heart of a woman, like the heart of a man, is also inhabited by spirits that do not come from God: rivalry, envy, possessiveness, abuse of power. But God is not scandalized, and in his infinite freedom, which is manifested particularly in mercy, he blesses and makes both these women fruitful, fertile, sorry. He chooses them as his allies to give a future to the world he has created. God gives fruitfulness, fertility to whom he will. The genealogy of Jesus that read in Matthew's Gospel presents four women, all irregular, all blessed by God, with the fecundity of the womb. The fourth woman is Mary, virgin, who conceives and gives birth to the Son of God. God gives fertility to whomever he wishes it is, to all those who open themselves to him. God pours out the gift of the Spirit on everyone, as creativity is one of the traits that make us similar to our Creator, and herein lies the foundation of the Christian consecrated life. Only the certainty of being able to be fathers and mothers, even otherwise, only the awareness that the fertility that comes from God embraces the biological dimension of human experiences, blesses it, expands it, and transcends it. And only this can sustain the renunciation of what in the scriptures of Israel is the gift of the gifts, that is, offspring. The protagonists of the story of Hagar, together with this woman, her son, and God, are the desert land and the water from the well. The land and the water are two elements that represent a woman and her fertility. In the Canticle of St. Francis, the woman is the promised land, and from her garden springs a spring of water capable of quenching the thirst not only of the beloved, but also of neighbors, friends, and all those who meet her. In the second story of creation, the earth is the mother from whom God draws the first human being. Unlike other ancient myths, which describe the birth of the universe as the result of the fruitful encounter between the male deity, heaven, and the female deity, earth, in the scriptures, the earth is not a deity at all. The earth is a creature, is the result of the creative act of one God, yet the symbolism is clear. Every human being as such is a child of God, and a mother's child belonging to God and creation. The earth, however, the earth alone is sterile. It needs water and the word of God to make it fruitful. If the word is the Son, the word is the Spirit. It's not by chance that the Spirit is a feminine noun in Hebrew, because it is life, the creative power of God. From the encounter between the earth and the water, between the woman and the Spirit, new life comes. Hope is born. In despair, Hagar in the desert could not see the water well, which was right in front of her eyes. Whoever loses hope normally loses the ability to see the future, loses the way, and loses creativity. And creativity, repeat it, one of the traits that make men and women similar to God. Creativity, creative imagination, is something that makes us capable of collaborating God's creative act, not only in terms of preserving creation, but in terms of making it grow and develop it. In the desert, God opens Hagar's eyes. That is, he restores hope to her and therefore the ability to see, to find the source of life. And in this passage, this death and the resurrection of Hagar expands her motherhood and prepares her to be the mother of a nation. And then the second part of my response, what can the experience of Hagar and Islam suggest for the development of cross-disciplinarity in research following the footsteps of Hagar? The method is literally the road we choose to take to reach the goal we've set for ourselves. What is the goal of our search? Well, perhaps it's not possible to set one when we talk about many disciplines. If all research, anyway, is in some way called to serve the good of the human family, then it's essential for each discipline to strive in their own way towards an ever greater awareness of the mission entrusted to us by God. To know, discover, disseminate everything that can help us to put our creative imagination to good use, to collaborate with the Creator in the ongoing development and renewal of creation. In this perspective, the Hagar's experience teaches, first of all, that pilgrimage is something related to people. Hagar lives with her son, and in her son, she brings with her the nation of which she will be the mother. Hagar carries with her the future of the people. The solitary explorer, in other words, may no longer be as they had been in the past, a good model for the seekers. Unlike the explorer, the pilgrim is somebody who knows where he or she is walking, there where others have already walked, and they know what they need others to reach the goal of their journey. In order to work together in the search, however, it's necessary to have something that unites us. A white robe that allows us to recognize ourselves despite our differences as part of the same people. Pope Francis could remind us in this regard that this white robe is enough to recognize us as brothers and sisters, and that we belong to one human race, our humanity, our maternal heritage, the fact that we are all woven of earth and water, and that we're all born of a woman and inhabited by the life that comes from God. This is our white robe, the destination of the pilgrimage, which is repeated every year, the pilgrimage of the Islam. The previous speaker talked about ends with a procession of pilgrims embracing an empty place. This emptiness, this void embraced by a procession of sisters and brothers reminds me of the first account of creation, where the Spirit of God embraces the abyss, an empty space, nothingness, according to the later philosophical interpretation of the act of creation. This abyss, this nothingness, is the space that God opens within himself to the newness of creation. It is God's womb from which God continually draws the forms of creation. It is God's creative imagination, which, in the power of the Word and the Spirit, brings to light the hidden forms. What does creation from nothing mean, if not that God creates all things solely from himself? The effectiveness of research method depends, in my opinion, on the ability of the researchers in the caravan of researchers to leave room for their own creative imagination on the one hand and remain in contact with God's creative imagination on the other, being open to ever new forms. Every good idea made absolute turns into an ideology. Creative imagination and contact with reality, putting concrete reality at the center of attention in all its plurality, complexity, reality with its surprises, with its continual breaking out of the rules and expectations. Well, all of these protects us from ideology and makes us capable of always learning from one another. By virtue of the white robe we wear, we can overcome the rigid boundaries that we sometimes build in order to defend our ideas or that we erected by following spirits that dwell in us, but which do not come from God. By virtue of the white robe we wear, we can live life as pilgrims and become mothers and fathers of peoples. We can collaborate with God like Hagar and Mary to prepare the future. It is not for nothing that the Second Vatican Council in number 8 of the Dei Verbum proposes Mary as a model for those who wish to collaborate in the continuous development of God's revelation in the world and for the world. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much for this wonderful speech. We hope we'll have enough time to comment on it. I'm going to present now the last pair today. And we'll be talking about the pedagogy of the cross-faith gaze, Paolo Trianni and Chiara Bertani. Trianni is a professor at the Pontifical Gregorian University and professor at the University of Trento in History of Religious Tradition, deals with the history, phenomenology, and theology of religions, especially in comparison with the ancient ones. And the other speaker has a degree in philosophy and with a dissertation of the ethics. And I'll give the floor to them. Thank you. I hope you can hear me okay. Good evening. I also teach at Sant'Anselmo. I'm saying that because I'm connected right from Sant'Anselmo University. I would like to thank the organizers of this wonderful conference and the inspiration that I draw inspiration, the suggestion for this short speech from Yvonne, because she said that I should be talk about Raymond Panikkar. And Panikkar, indeed, in Panikkar, indeed, we have a threefold look. And also due to his background, Panikkar has a philosophical, ideological, and theological basis. But also, he provides us a perspective from a Christian, Hindu, and Buddhist point of view. So, from a Western, Christian, and Asian point of view. And Panikkar thought of truth from these threefold perspective. There is a sentence that you probably already know, which is quite famous, and it's rather debatable. And it says, I started out as a Christian, I discovered myself as a Hindu, and then I returned as a Buddhist without ever ceasing to be a Christian. Well, I didn't want to comment on these sentence, and then, but it's very interesting, it's a threefold point of view. I'll come back on this later on. In Panikkar, this threefold perspective, which is similar to the perspective of Romano Guardini, in a way, it could be a source to him because he studied in Germany. So it's about the radical trinity. So everything is connected with everything else, and there is a threefold relation between the cosmos, the man, and God. And we already have found this also in Chardin. And he's focusing on truth. Panikkar, he doesn't introduce the concept of plurality because he said the reality is many names and each name is a new aspect of it. So Panikkar rejects the concept of pluralism, of plurality, which is somehow colonialistic, and he speaks of pluralism as a recognition of plurality, as a recognition that interculturality, especially today, has full legitimacy. He wants to legitimate de jure this cultural pluralism. And he associates truth not with univocity, but with plurality. Another additional concept is that truth has no center. Why does he say this? Because if it had a center, then we would go back to intolerance. Also because this center has always been identified with the West. On the other hand, Panikkar points out that truth is polar. What does it mean by polar? In other words, truth turns out to be dialogical. So truth is more a direction, a path, rather than something that we own. And in fact, he points out that the center is, if anything, mobile. So, to put it better, truth is a dialogical dynamism that involves and calls into question different cultural and religious instances, not only one. So Panikkar was very critical of univocity, that this cultural flattening where everything turns into a global village, this global village syndrome, which is the highest form of the West's cultural colonialism. To be more precise, Panikkar asserted that truth is not one, not multiple. What does he mean by that? Well, he says Truth is not univocal, as it cannot be reduced to a single concept. Truth manifests itself as a pluralism of truth. And he adds, truth is beyond unity and plurality. This is one of the most daring concepts of his philosophy, and from several points of view, it's not to be fully resolved. Panikkar couldn't affirm that truth is one, precisely because in this case it would destroy the richness of diversity, the rainbow of the spirit, the plurality of cultures. But neither could he say that it is manifold, because in this case he would be preserving a blatant and irremediable contradiction between cultures and religions. Fortunately, I cannot go into detail, but how can Panikkar get out of these impasse? Well, it takes refuge in an objective apophatism. So he says that if there is a single truth, it is on another level which cannot be described with words. And in his last book, The Rhythm of Being, which contains a bit of his spiritual testament, is forced to affirm that ultimate problems do not have an ultimate solution. So this is quite interesting. Honeycutt is coming to the end of his life. After studying pluralism throughout his life, he gives up. He says that religious diversity cannot be made harmonic. But beyond these final considerations, what is functional to trans-religious ethical education is the Panikkarian promotion of pluralism as a look, as an attitude in the face of reality. A view that doesn't eliminate multiplicity, but enhances it, even from a spiritual and confessional point of view. It is because of this perspective that Panikkar has become one of the leading theorists of dialogue, especially of interfaith dialogue. Indeed, he invented the neologism of intra-religious dialogue to signify that it is necessary to have a relationship with religious diversity that is not only instinctive, not only conceptual, but is textual. It has to be textual, symbolic, and spiritual. You really have to enter another religion. You cannot engage in a dialogue if you haven't been walking in somebody else's shoes. Panikkar also introduces two other concepts to justify this need to develop a manifold view of reality, that of prospectivity, and then the concept of the distinction between relativity and relativism. Now, the first concept, prospectivity, well, it was well known in Indian philosophical thought. Jainism based its religious tolerance on perspectivism. And Panikkar also argues that one must respect the other who sees things from different perspectives. And he also quotes, besides these giant story of the blind touching different parts of an elephant, and they all get a different idea, even though they're actually touching the same identical reality because they're touching different parts of the elephant. The second concept, that prompts us to distinguish relativity from relativism is a traditional theme of him. Well, in Italian, all the words ending on ism have pejorative meaning. It's as if it was a devaluation of their value. Relativity, on the other hand, is the recognition, the acknowledgement that any reality or judgment is in a relation to something else, and it depends on something else, is determined by other factors. And this distinction, unfortunately, I have no time to see it in detail. This is a concept that also comes from the East and especially from the Buddhist philosophical civilization, but was stated by Kant too. In short, one of the most important contributions left by Panikkar is precisely his theory of pluralism, which doesn't consider unity an essential ideal, which doesn't allow for a universal system, which doesn't claim to understand and explain everything. In this regard, for example, he made a significant distinction between logos and spirit, arguing that the spirit goes beyond logos. He argued, for example, that the divine cannot be reduced to an infinite logos. And he added that the being as such, even if it's surrounded or if it coexists with logos or with a supreme intelligence, does not need to be reduced to consciousness. That's exactly what I was talking about before. So we need to go beyond rationality. So rationalization, in other words, can not only be reductive, but also it can lead to divisions and anti-dialogue. Can be anti-dialogical. Rationalization is monocultural and non-plural because it takes place through a partial logical vocabulary, which is not that of the other with capital letter, but it's only my own. It's a failure to take into account that my rationalization concerns my own cultural point of view. It is a failure to take into account that it is always a determination and that it cannot be an absolute view. With respect to cosmotheantrism, the relation between the cosmos, God, and man, Panikkar insisted on the need for an a-dualistic view, So not non-dualistic, but a-dualistic. So a relation without division. And cosmotheantrism is linked to his vision of pluralism. To explain this concept better, Panikkar does not advocate a monistic view. No, he is advocating an ontological relation. There's a radical ontological relation, a threefold relation. And Panikkar thinks of the Trinity in an economic way, and he included in Trinity also the cosmos. It's almost time to wrap up. Okay, so just one last sentence and then conclude. So we can say that the Panikkarian theory of pluralism, that is the conceptual journey between the West, India, and Christianity, can be considered a theoretical basis or premise for that interreligious education or ethics of the plural gaze that our contemporary civilization so badly needs. Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. And now we're going to give the floor to um, Dr. Bertani for her response. I'm going to concentrate my part on an author whom I devoted my PhD dissertation to, and I'll be concentrating on Germain Chamin. I'm talking about theologies of interreligious dialogue. I think it's fair that this author finds his I think it's important to talk about these person, about who abandoned France and abandoned his academic experience and devoted his life to India. So he became an Indian among Indians. I think that the experience of Jules Chamin can make us understand that across religious gaze on the one hand, and then the Panikkara's reflection on the other hand can help us integrate and better understand what was Monchanin's life and the intensity of his thought. Professor Triani's speech highlighted triple gaze that forms the background and the method to Panikkara's reflection. Threefold gaze that combines philosophical, ideological, theological, and Western Christian and Asian thought. Not only we've seen how in Panikara there is a cosmic and even trinitarian triplicity of gaze that manages to grasp reality as a whole in relation, cosmotheandry. This same gaze, which is a relational gaze that is capable of grasping and enhancing a cultural and religious otherness by integrating it in a dialogical manner, because it doesn't cancel multiplicity, but rather enhances it, can be found in Jules Monchanin, the author I devoted my PhD dissertation to. And Jules Monchanin was met by Panikkar on the occasion of his first trip to India. In fact, Jules Monchanin's reflection manages to combine philosophical, theological, and ideological Western Christian and Asian thought, and to take shape as a Trinitarian reflection that grasps the intrinsic relationality of man and places it in the dynamic horizon of the cosmos intention towards God. Not only that, in Monchanin, we find a threefold knowledge that is articulated and unfolds on three distinct and connected levels. Those of theoretical knowledge is philosophical and theological reflection, which becomes knowledge of experience, and finally contemplation of the world, where he gathers the results of the first two elements. On the level of theoretical knowledge, is philosophical speculation led him to outline an entirely original and systematic thought, his personalist idealism, which, by placing the person as a relationship at the center, is in fact order to relationality and dialogicality. This philosophical and theological system of his becomes the premise and the basis for a knowledge of experience that becomes concrete in its life, not only with the choice to devote himself to interfaith dialogue with different religions, Jews, Islam, India, China, also with the communist world, but especially with the decision to devote his life to the conversion of India, thereby becoming an Indian among Indians and thus embodying that theology of exchange that he further processes in his work. Philosophical and theological speculation and the knowledge of experience come together and they open up to a particular contemplation of the world in which otherness is welcomed with that trans-religious gaze of which Professor Trianni spoke and which is absolutely necessary to mention today. If we look at the philosophical reflection of Jules Montchanin, his personalist idealism, we see how the movement underlying the foundation of the philosophical category of personalism to define the person substantially as esse ad alterum, a definition that allows him to grasp the I as a constitutively open to otherness. Montchanin not only highlights the ontological relational dimension of the ego, but also helps us to understand how men can open up to otherness and welcome it without fusion or annihilation of his own self, because man makes otherness the very condition of the creation of the ego, of the I. What constitutes the I and essentially characterizes man is, in fact, the relationship with the other. That ontological tension towards otherness that is proper to the person as esse ad alterum, in which man personifies himself. This movement of tension towards another, towards a you, means that the gaze of the other constitutes me as I. So in this tension of living the self, man personifies himself through this relationship with the other. And in this mutual movement of one towards the other, uh, both players discover we in a dynamic, however, that is not a fusion that flattens or eliminates their respective identities, but that is a mutual and ardent question in which the mystery of the existential unity of two irreducible otherness is fulfilled. In this existential communion, the two can be united without there being any reduction of one to the other. And this is why Jules Montchanin's philosophical reflection can help us to understand and ground that inter and transreligious view that legitimizes interculturality because it welcomes otherness as such without claiming to assimilate it to itself or without running the risk of canceling its own identity in a distincted we. It is the very category of person that, as esse ad alterum, always and structurally includes diversity and otherness and emphasizes the constitutive dialogicality of man. On the path taken by Montchanin, his philosophical and theological speculation is intended to be the basis and premise for openness to the other, and above all, he lays down the foundation for that comparison and synthesis with the Indian thought to which he wished to devote his life. It is precisely with this intention that he was the first to theorize the so-called theology of exchange, of which he about which he wrote, I believe more and more in exchange. India has the task of communicating to the West a sharper sense of the eternal, of the primacy of the being over becoming. The West has the task of communicating to the person the task of communicating to the person love, which India knows so little about. So Moshanan hoped that India could approach and embrace the mystery of the Trinity. He believed that this mystery would illuminate Indian spirituality and thought, which was incapable of reconciling transcendence with immanence. Thought with love, the world, the one, and the many. On the other hand, however, he was firmly convinced that the depth of Indian thought would bring a very rich contribution to the very contemplation of the Trinitarian mystery. And it was precisely with these perspective that he sought that synthesis between Western and Indian thought to which he had decided to devote his life, but which he perceived as barely sketched out synthesis, and he knew that it would take centuries and several generations of thinker to be completed. But he knew that this synthesis would be completed on a physical level only when India accepted the concept of a person and the West accepted the sense of the eternal in a dialectic of mutual exchange. So while waiting for these higher synthesis of thought, that, if you use his words, he was awaiting with missionary patience, he devoted himself to the knowledge of experience that became concrete in his life. Moshanan succeeded in embodying his theology of exchange by immersing himself in the Indian reality, where he wanted to live as an Indian, and above all, by dedicating himself to his project of founding a Christian ashram in India, which he conceived as a place of encounter between Christianity and Hinduism, and as an opportunity for welcoming and engaging in dialogue with the other. Henri de Lubac, one of his biographers and a close friend, points out in this regard how Moshe not only had an impressive knowledge of Indian culture, but he embodied it. And the first image he recalls of him is that of a man who was not only a scholar, but who relived and abolished any distance of time and place, and so was able to relive the spiritual adventure of those distant human brothers, who relived it himself as they did. To deepen this knowledge of experience, he and his companion, the Benedictine monk Henri Lesseau, they literally immerse themselves in that reality. First, by visiting the ashrams to experience, learn more about that religious reality, meditate and observe the training of the sannyasi, the Indian monks. And among these, the ashram of Ramana Maharshi at the foot of Mount Arunachala, one of India's sacred mountains. And then he went on to found his own Christian ashram in India, the ashram of the Holy Trinity. And here, Monshanan and Lesseau decided to wear the orange robes of sannyasin. They adopted their vegetarian diet. They took a vow of total poverty. They changed their names. They prayed reciting hymns and verses in Sanskrit. They used incense. And especially they welcomed and conversed with all those who came to the ashram to meet them, and among them Panika. So the ashram thus became, according to the goals with which it was created, a place of interreligious and intercultural encounter where Monshanan gave hospitality and conversed with anyone, and where he opened up to otherness. So we can say that his reflection and concrete experience of immersion in otherness can lead us to that specific contemplation of the world in which we can truly say that Mont Shannon succeeded and actually incarnated that interreligious look that Panikkar speaks of. And which in fact Panikkar managed in conceptualizing. It's a gaze that is capable of immersing itself in a context, in a reality, and there it can open up to otherness, welcoming it as such, but without, however, eliminating itself, but preserving its own identity, which alone can allow logic of exchange and the appreciation of the other. Today, well, Papa would like to say that Pope Francis himself invites us to promote these culture of encounter, and in the Veritas Gaudium, he talks about a culture of encounter of all authentic and vital cultures. It emphasizes on these, the importance of the encounter, where we can open up to the gaze of the other, and at the same time, the gaze of the other reveals our deepest identity. Why is that? Because it can enhance our deepest identity. Thank you.
Sede, abbiamo ancora qualche minuto.
We still have a couple of minutes, 10 to 15 minutes for questions. So even though it's already past 7 p.m. Rome time, so that we have at least some time to ask a few questions to our speakers. I see there's a question. Please go ahead. Yes, good evening, everybody. Can you hear me okay? Yes. Thank you very much for these very interesting talks. Well, I have two questions. The first one is pretty straightforward. I wanted to ask Paolo Triani and Chiara Bertani if they can please write down the names of the authors, because it was really quick and I'm not sure I got them right. And then my second question refers to the first two speeches about the female gaze. Well, it was a bit difficult to understand for me. I'll explain it. I am a student in Berlin at the Faculty of Theology, which is a pretty liberal one, where we also have a queer theology. In a way, it's called queer theology, so a very feminine theology. And when you talk about a feminine gaze, well, most of the times I know that this is not accepted. So I'm not sure whether I understood very well this concept of the feminine gaze. So what is how can we differentiate the feminine gaze from the masculine gaze? Is there a masculine gaze? And then these female gaze is often connected with fertility. So I was wondering whether these concept of binding these two elements together, so being a woman and being fertile, whether it's a fair connection. I hope I made myself clear. Thank you. The microphone was off, so it was impossible to translate it. Can you hear us now? Yes. I don't know whether Paolo Triani and Chiara Bertani can write the names on the chat box. Yes, we already did that. Yes, so you can find the names in the chat. All right, perfect. So shall I start? Yes, please go ahead. Well, first of all, Raimond Manikar was a friend of mine. I had the honor to live with him 10 days in his and his dwelling in the last years of his life. And he was and he still is the master of encounter. We were the representatives of the main 9 religions of the world, and we experienced what we are still advancing today, because each religion, well, each representative of each religion that was there had to summarize using a short text what they really felt about their faith and presenting it to the other, and the other had to carefully listen to them, and in turn they had to explain what they perceived about others, the other person's religion. It was a really beautiful experience. I really got to know in a profound way the other. So I want to thank Paolo for talking about Hanukkah. The female gaze, what's the difference between the female and the male gaze? Well, there's a difference. We cannot deny it. It's there. I think that equality does not mean being identical. We have differences. There's a harmony, there's a path towards harmony. And thanks to the differences, then we also have fertility and life itself. So we cannot deny that there's a diversity. So through these texts, I didn't want to give a greater importance to the female gaze, but I wanted to give attention to it because it's important. Because if life gave the womb to women, so I think that women really have a greater power to biologically welcome and nourish life through also breastfeeding, for example, lactation, and also to accompany life, especially in the first 2 years of the life of a child. So this very task that life entrusted to women also gives a greater responsibility to women. I'd say that women have the duty to enter the social scene to bring a harmony and a welcoming approach and to forgive. Barbanica himself talked about the magical power of forgiveness. Forgiveness is almost divine. It's something divine because who can forgive if they haven't received the force by from God? And women can forgive more easily. A mother can forgive more easily rather than a father, for example, or a man. So, and these are this is a series of subtleties that uh, describe these female gays. The women have to enter the political, social, and world stage. They have this duty because it's a world that needs harmony, forgiveness, welcoming, and these female gays. And it's a rather complex topic, but unfortunately, I cannot go further in detail due to time constraints. Well, I perfectly understood the question because I know that some areas support your stance. So I perfectly understand your question, and it's a rather difficult question. I think so. It's a difficult question, and I don't think we can say either yes or no, but we can only provide a few elements of reflections. Feminism is the universe filled with planets, and on each planet we have different feminists living there who see things very differently. And some of them, they'll get annoyed when you talk about a female gaze, and some others love this kind of topic. So from this point of view, I think that feminists should try and better respect other opinions that express different experiences and life experiences, because it has all to do with our basic relations and how we want to be feminists, or if we do not want to be feminists at all. So I think that sometimes there's a constraint, a limit, there's a prevailing vision, and those who have a different vision are stigmatized. And I don't think that this will advance a reflection, whatever the vision is, whatever the view is. This is the first thing I want to say. The second thing I wanted to say is that it goes without saying that I think there's something typical about the female gaze. To me, it's connected with fertility, because if I, to say it concretely, well, if I didn't have my period, I think my life would be different. And I think that this really leads me to ask myself a series of questions. And I'm thinking how it can be a resource for my life and for the life of others, regardless of the children I may have. It's my own body, and it's not an idea, it's a fact. But in spite of all of this, I think it's rather dangerous to come up with rigid definitions about what is the typically feminine or masculine, because based on concrete data, we are called to learn from one another, men and women, and also to look like each other in the best things. Jesus also had many motherly gestures. For example, when he offers bread, he says, "This is my body." Well, he's performing a feminine gesture, because only women can biologically provide food to others. And Jesus teaches us that we have to learn the ones from the others. Well, I think that this is the main things I wanted to say. Thank you. All right. I don't know whether I have to answer two. Well, with regards to this topic, I'd like to say, talking about the female gaze. A scholar said that he went to India in order to complete theology, because he identified the Western with femininity, and these Eastern gaze could complete theology, because he was adding the feminine element to it. There's a question from Professor Schlubitten. Yvonne, off you go. Well, first of all, I wanted to thank you for your wonderful presentations and that share some common elements, even though at first glance it looked as if they didn't have much in common, but in the end they do have many things in common. And starting off from Guardini, well, he wrote, and then he removed the part. Well, in the Italian translation, there was no part about Buddha. Whereas in his book about the Lord, there was a comparison between Buddha and Christ. And probably there's something we never take into account, and it's emerging right now. So if we talk about male, female, or masculine, feminine, if we talk about education, then we have to talk also about the education of knowledge. And if we talk about knowledge, then there's something very interesting we have to talk about, and which we've repeated so many times. Agostino, Orland Bat, Robinson in Castaway, that draws on a balloon. He paints a face on a balloon. Sorry, on a ball to create a person so that he can overcome that difficult situation. So what I think is interesting. Unfortunately, probably we do not have time. I just wanted to say that everybody talked about a theoretical knowledge, and then about an experiential knowledge. So knowledge that was gained through experience. And also another common element is contemplation. The question is, how can we combine everything? It's very different compared to what we heard in Balthasar, because in his book, he's interpreting Guardini in another way. But I wanted to talk about the Weltanschauung that Guardini has, which is a third way of knowledge on the same level of the knowledge deriving from theories and experiences. They are all on the same level. So it's not, it's three of them. And they always go together. We cannot miss none of them. And at the same time, there's also the ability to look through theory and experience. So in this sense, it's Trinitarian. So the question about what is masculine, what is feminine, in the process of knowledge first, and then where is the encounter? When we were talking about the pilgrimage, what is the encounter of these three different forms of knowledge, or when we combine three different religions? Well, I just wanted to explain that we could interpret it, or we could interpret this path also on the level of the process of knowledge that could open up or solve many questions. Thank you. Thank you. Well, if there are no further questions, then we can take a break for dinner, at least in Italy. And in the meantime, probably you think of more questions. Yvonne, what time are we coming back? Well, should be 8 o'clock. It's already 7:22 p.m. in Italy. So let's say 8:15 p.m. I think it's acceptable. So 8:15 p.m. Rome time. Oh, I wanted to say goodbye because I won't be able to attend later. Thank you very much. It's been a wonderful afternoon. Thank you. Thank you, Linda. I may be late due to traffic conditions, so Yvonne will start, and as soon as I'm home, then I'll log in again. Thank you very much. It's been very interesting, and see you later.